Kia ora, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our Hooked on Books reviewing webinar. It's so cool to see so many keen readers who have joined us. My name is Juliet, not John Duke, as it says in your screen there, and I'm from Reading Seklepo Muramura, and together with Claire, we're really delighted to be hosting this seminar. And thanks for joining us. For some of you, it might be your lunch break, otherwise lunch might be coming up. You would have seen when you came into the Zoom just that we're recording this session, and that's just so that those who can't make it can catch up with it later. And thank you also to all of you who've sent in questions, and Claire's going to answer those at the end of the seminar. But if you have other questions, please pop them in the chat, or don't be shy to put your hand up at the end and ask Claire some questions. And just remember, there's no silly questions, so please don't feel shy about anything that you would like to know about reviewing, or perhaps you might also like to ask Claire about her writing. So now I'm just going to introduce Claire. Claire is a writer. She's written a middle grade novel called The Raven's Eye Runaways, which you might even have read. That was published last year. She's the founder of Verb Wellington, which is a literary festival that's been running in Wellington for the last 10 years. And she's also books editor at Spinoff. And you might even like to ask Claire what that means. Claire is mum to Charlie, and Claire is joining us from her kitchen in the south coast of Wellington. So thank you so much to Claire, and please, we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much, Juliet, and kia ora everyone. Welcome to my kitchen. You might hear the wind. It's very windy out here at the moment. So if you hear stunning, like a roaring noise, it's the wind hitting my roof. So I'm just going to share my screen because I have prepared some slides, and I will do it this way, and we'll go up the top. And I just wanted to start actually by asking you all a question. And I think there might be a function on Zoom where you can kind of put a hand up, or you could just unmute yourself and share your answers, whatever they might be. And I'm just curious to know why you all think we review books. What is the point? Why do we do it? And if anyone has a thought about that, I'd love to hear it, and then I'll share with you what I think. So feel free to unmute yourself and throw in an answer if you have one. If you don't, I will tell you what I think.
Looks like Nell's got a question, Claire.
Oh, awesome. Nell, do you mind unmuting?
I think it's so that people can decide whether they want to read the book.
Right, I think it's definitely a part of it, I reckon. So now just said is to decide, to help people decide whether or not they would like to read that book. Papa Korwhai, do you have an answer as well?
I think that was pretty much our answer too, wasn't it?
Okay, awesome. Okay, great. Wow, I think there's a part of reviewing, but I actually think there's more to it. And I actually think it's quite a personal answer to the question. And I think there's lots of industry reasons why we review books, because publishers would like books to get into the media so that they get into the public's mind and maybe a reader will buy them. It also reviews help writers figure out how readers are responding to their work, and that can be really fun and really surprising as well. But I think that reviewing a book is a chance to have a conversation between you and the book. And a review is basically publishing that conversation and letting other people listen in. So I think actually before we even think about the marketing or publicity for books, it's actually what you think of the story that you're reading. And I think that that's one of the main points to keep in mind when you're reviewing a book. So I think that reading is the most important part of reviewing. When you're reviewing a book, you've got to always be reading it really closely. So there's this thing called close reading that I do every day for my job, and I do it also when I'm a writer, I'm trying to closely read my own work, which is really hard. But close reading basically means noticing. And it's noticing all sorts of different things as you're reading a book. And I've put in my little list here, and this slideshow, by the way, can be sent around if anyone wants to have a read of it, because I have written a lot. But I've put at the top of my list about noticing the cover. I actually think covers are really important, even though we always say this whole thing about not judging a book by its cover. I actually think now covers are really carefully made, and I do think that they can give a very interesting first impression. So I think you can notice that, and that's okay. And then you're noticing things like the characters, how they're changing, what they're doing across the story. You're noticing the setting. Where is this happening? When is it happening? What might indicate the time period and the place? What sorts of things has the writer put into the book to show you that? And then blips, this really weird word called blips, which I think is basically anything in the book that makes you stop for any reason, and you might not even know at the time why something has made you pause and notice it, but it's really good to mark it down, like turning the corner of the page, which is what I do, which some people hate doing, but I turn the corner of a page whenever I find a blip. And I often keep a little notepad when I'm reading, if I'm reviewing, and I'll write down the page number and just whatever it is that's made me stop and think, because later, once I finish the book, I'll be able to go back and go, oh yeah, that was a blip, and now I kind of understand why. You're noticing how the book is making you feel. What are you thinking? How are you feeling as you're reading the book? Are you scared? Are you intrigued? Are you bored? There can be negative feelings and positive feelings as you're reading. And then you're also noticing in a kind of bigger picture way what the book is relating to in your mind. What is it responding to? What's it reminding you of? Does it link to any other kind of art in your head, like other books you've read, maybe movies, maybe artworks, or maybe TV, maybe games? Like, how is the book relating to other stories in your life? And so that is close reading. So close reading is really closely noticing lots of things about what's going on in your brain as you're reading. And I just kind of said this already, but I think working out a way of keeping notes as you read is really great. And that can just be whatever works for you, whether that's having a little notepad or using the Notes app on your phones, or whatever works best for you. Is really great. So then by the time you get to the end of the book, you've got this really interesting list of thoughts that you've had. So once you've finished your really close reading, you have to start the writing bit. And writing a review is very different to reading a book. And it can be really tricky because you've got all these thoughts and ideas about what you've just read, and now you have to try and formulate them and write them down so it's really clear for someone else to understand what you're thinking. So one of the best bits of advice that I ever was given about writing, and it was from an Irish writer called Claire Keegan, who writes very short stories that are very, very good, because she writes about 40 drafts minimum for every story, which blew my mind. But she said, don't give up on your work when it needs you the most. And I think it's so tempting when things feel very hard just to go, oh, it's too hard. But if you just keep going, it'll get easy again. So one tip that I was given as well that I like to share is, don't worry too much about your first draft. Don't worry too much about structure or grammar or spelling or anything like that. Just try and write down as passionately as you can what you think. And I think what happens when you do that is you get the truth of your feelings out on the page. And after you've got that down, you can start to organize it. And this bit is, sometimes writers call it the sculpting part. So you can imagine you're an artist trying to push your words around so that it turns into a beautiful work of art. So there are some things that are great not to do when you're reviewing. And these are the three things that I reckon is quite good to keep in mind. don't summarize the whole plot of the book. Lots of people do this because sometimes it's really hard not to. But all you really want to do is set the scene. So you might want to say, when the book is set, the main trouble, like let's say, oh, it's gone right on my. So my book is a world where people aren't allowed to read or write. It's illegal, and so that's kind of all you really need, is just that's the main problem in the book. And then you might want to set out who the main characters are, who's telling the story. But you don't want to tell the whole book, because otherwise you kind of spoil it, and it's also not very interesting to read. The next thing I would say is don't worry too much about what you think a review is supposed to be. Remember, this is about what you think about the book and what it made you think about. And it might make you think about something that feels really unrelated to the book, but that's really interesting to know. Like, why did this book make you think of something really different? That's a very interesting way to write a review. One thing that I don't do is read other reviews of a book that I'm supposed to be reviewing. And the main reason I don't do that is because I get worried that I will be influenced by them, that I'll start to think in the same way as another reviewer. But sometimes if you get really stuck and you're unsure of what you're thinking, reading another review of the book that you're reviewing might help if you don't agree with it. And sometimes that can be fun, because you think, oh, well, this reviewer thought that, but I actually thought something very different. And that can help you formulate what you want to say. And so that can be a do, but also a don't, but also a do sometimes if you're stuck. And these are the things to do when you're reviewing. Be really honest. This is your thoughts. It's how you responded to the book. You're allowed to say what you think, but don't be mean. Sometimes you can read extremely critical reviews, and that's really healthy. But I think you've also got to make sure that you're also looking at what's good about the book. And one formula for doing that is called the sandwich formula, where you say something good about the book, something that didn't work for you, a critical thing, and then something else good. And it's the sandwich approach. And the main reason for doing this is because a review is very personal, someone else will think about the book quite differently to you. So sometimes it's about being fair to the book, fair to the author, but also fair to potential readers. So it's very fine and good to say what did not work for you and why, as long as you justify it. But it's also good to concentrate on elements that did work. And most of the time there'll be at least one thing that was good. Another great thing to do is think about a review as a piece of writing in and of itself. And that just means you're writing. This is your chance to make a really interesting piece of writing. And so you can use interesting language. You can try and make it as clear and flowing as you possibly can. So think of yourself as a creative writer when you're writing a review, and that makes it more fun as well. And if you get really stuck, go back to the book. Go back to the things that made you wonder or confused, and go back to it again and see if you've got thoughts about why that happened to you when you were reading. So structuring a review is really hard. I find structure difficult across all writing because it is the hardest bit. And there's lots of different decisions you can make around structure. But here are some basic things that I think really helpful when you're thinking about reviewing. So your opening. So you want a really interesting opening, just like a novel. You want it to capture you from the very beginning. And I found this interesting one about Onyx Storm, which is a big novel that came out at the beginning of the year. And the first sentence of the review is, a few years ago, Rebecca Yarros almost quit writing. And that's an interesting way to start. Like, why did she almost quit writing? So you kind of immediately want to find out. And that's a piece of information about the writer of the book. And that is something you can also do. You can have a look at the author. What else have they written? Have they got an interesting story as well? Did that interesting story come into the book they've written? So you can start looking at the author as well as the book. I think it's really helpful for your readers of your review for them to know from the beginning whether you're giving this book a rave review or a more critical review. And I really like this first sentence from Indigo on Hooked on Books. And she says, "This book was undoubtedly the best piece of New Zealand literature I have ever read." So that's a hugely raving, great, positive claim. And so the rest of her review has to say why was it the best piece of New Zealand literature she's ever read. And I find that sentence really compelling. I want to know why is it so good. Sometimes it's really good to have one key idea in your review. There might be something that really struck you more than anything else in the book, and you can focus your whole review around that. Like if you thought the main character was one of the most interesting characters, or the most problematic, or the most intriguing characters you've ever read, you could just focus your review on that character and why. Or if you thought the world building was really spectacular or interesting, then you could just focus on that if you wanted to too, and that's okay. You're allowed to focus on one aspect of the book and really work out your thoughts about it. And the last thing is to have a really clear pathway through the review for your reader, and that really comes down to paragraphs. And paragraphs are like the building blocks of writing, especially when you're writing reviews and articles and journalism actually in general. And the basic rule is each paragraph is about one idea only. So you might want to do something like a paragraph on character, a paragraph on the setting, and then a paragraph about the ideas in the book. And that would be a really clear way to structure your review. And this is page 2 of structuring, a little bit more detail. One thing I think is great to do in your review is to include quotes from the book. It's always really fun for a reader to get a glimpse of the voice of the book. So, for example, the same review from Indigo, they actually, I can't quite read it properly because of the view I've got, but you can read that in your own time, but she uses a quote from Rebecca's book, Greta and Veldin, in the review, and that's a really handy thing to do to illustrate your point. So if you're saying the dialogue in this book was really crisp and interesting like this, and then you give an example, and you'd word it more clearly and beautifully than I just said it, but you'd give an example of the dialogue from the book to show your reader what you mean. And another really great thing to do is when you think you've got your draft really good and you've kind of got everything you want to say out, read the review out loud. This is the greatest way that I know to find out if you've made any little mistakes. Sometimes your eyes just don't see things and your internal voice can make things up sometimes. But if you read it aloud, you'll catch any clunky bits that you might want to change, or bits that don't actually make sense that you can change later. So reading it out loud is really helpful. And another tip is don't be afraid to chop bits. If you think that, oh, I've actually already said that, you can just delete it. It's a really hard lesson about writing, is cutting things, but cutting things is often really good. It makes your writing better, especially if it's feeling a bit unwieldy or a bit long. You can always chop things. So here's a really basic review structure, really good headline. So this is from my world of journalism at the Spinoff, but I have recently learned, because I'm very new to journalism, headlines can be so helpful to think about. And another word for a headline is just a title, the title of your review. And the titles can give your reader a really quick idea of what you're doing. So let's say an example is the fantasy read of the year. That's immediately interesting headline, because you're like, what is this? What book is it? And so your readers will keep going. A really great opening sentence, something that will just capture your reader. Sometimes I think questions are quite good, because when you write down a question, your reader will want to answer it, and they'll also want to know what you think. So I just made one up that said, "Thought you'd had enough of dragons and books? Well, think again." So that's just something to capture your reader and make them want to keep reading your review. Then you could do 3 paragraphs that show the reader what you liked or disliked. And paragraphs can be quite short. It might just be 3 sentences each. You could start with character, then you could look at setting, and then you could look at ideas in the book. And then you have a pithy. Pithy means short and to the point. Final paragraph that sums up your ideas and tells your reader ultimately how you feel and why you feel. And that's your chance to kind of sell the book, to really say, I think readers who like this will love this book. Or you might want to ask people to be more wary, perhaps. Depends how you feel. So there's lots of different kinds of reviews. There's longer reviews. So that can be, sometimes I write reviews that are about 2,000 words, which are a bit on the long side. Sometimes under 1,000 words, which is a shortish review. Or these really short reviews, which are 200 or 300 words, and those are really great to practice with, and they're really hard. A short review, if you can do a short review really, really well, that's awesome. And a great website for short reviews that are really good is called Kirkus Reviews. It's online, and all of their reviews are super short, and they all include one final sentence that sums up the book. So I found one, I stole one from the website, and it said, "A warm-hearted novel with a great central character and plenty of laughs." That's a great summarizing sentence that tells people what to expect. And just checking my time, good. So editing, this goes back to that whole don't be afraid to chop your review. So editing is as important as writing, and editing means reading your work over and over again and changing it and tweaking it, sometimes in big ways, sometimes in really little ways, to make sure it's super smooth and exactly what you mean, so it's really clear. Try and chop anything out that doesn't progress what you're trying to say. That's really hard. But sometimes you can go off on tangents, and I do this all the time. I get really excited about different things, and so I start writing in tangents. But sometimes that's not the best thing for the review. You just want it to stay nice and clear in that pathway for the reader. So sometimes I delete whole ideas from a review if it's actually too much. And sometimes, I don't know how much editing of other work that you do, if you swap things with your friends and get them to read it for you and for them to tell you what they think. But don't be afraid of someone editing your work. Editors make your work better. That's their job. I get edited, everything I write gets edited, and they always make it way better. And it's really lucky and awesome. And wow, we got to question time. Great. I wanted to leave lots of time for questions, because in my experience, students have the best questions of all. So there were 3 that got sent in earlier. So I can read those out and we can talk about them. And then I'd love any more questions that you might have. So I don't know if I can't move my review. Oh, there we go. There we go. That's better. So first question, in a review, how much of your personal taste preferences should be present versus comments on the quality of the writing and story making in general? So that's the first of a 2-part question. I feel that your personal preferences is the only way to approach a review, because to me, reading is just impossible to be objective, because you're bringing so much of yourself to the story. And a lot of writers think like that too. They think the book is not complete until a reader has met it and brought their own set of ideas to the book. So I think reviews have to focus on your personal response. But the trick is you have to say why. And when you have to say why you feel the way you feel. And when you're commenting on the quality of the writing and story making, that is slightly more objective, because you can say, oh, the grammar wasn't very good here, or I found it a bit clunky here, but you have to give examples and say why. But that's still subjective. Some people might love the style of the author, some people might not. So it is still a personal approach. You just always have to justify it. If you really hate a book, should you still try to find positives about it to make a more balanced review? Yes, I think you should, because if you're only going to talk about the negatives, that doesn't give the readers of your review the chance to understand the positives, and then it will turn them off completely to the book, where it could be the book that they love the most all year. So I think being balanced is really important, but it is okay to say negative things as long as you justify them. How to write a book review title that grabs attention and makes the reader want to continue. Yeah, it's so hard to do this. It's really hard, but it's so important. I think questions can be quite good as titles. I think that's a really interesting approach, because you're immediately engaging the reader in a conversation. I think if it's a really famous author, making sure that the name is in the title is quite good, because people do want to know what you think about popular books. I have found that popular books that get reviewed tend to get lots of reads. I think if you have a main point in your review, you could work that into the title. Like, for example, some of the best, the best world building I've read all year, or something like that. So you'd have the title of the book, like Dragon Defenders by James Russell, best world building I've ever read, or something like that. If that's what you think, you could sometimes indicate from the title what you think, and then the reader will want to know why. How much plot summary should you put in your review? Some people say you should do a full one. Some say you shouldn't do one at all. What is my take? So my take is you should not do a full plot summary. I think it ruins the book, and it ruins the potential reading for people, because you've already told them what happens. You just want to set the scene. You just want to introduce people enough so that they understand the context. So you can just set up the scenario, but you don't have to tell what happens. Because yeah, you'll just ruin it. And it's just not that interesting to read. Like a review is your thoughts about the ideas of the book primarily, I think. Like what is going on in this book? How does it relate to our lives? What is the intention of the book? What is the author trying to get us to think about? How are they doing that? How are they doing that through the characters, through the setting, through the world? How are they delivering these ideas to us? How can you find the balance between giving your opinion and letting the reader decide whether they want to read the book? Well, I think giving your opinion is completely fine, and it's up to the reader to decide whether or not they want to make their own opinion. I don't think you have to worry about that too much. As long as you've been really fair, told the reader what you think in your review in a balanced way, and you've justified it all, then it's up to the reader to decide what to do. I don't think you have to worry about that at all. Yeah, that's the end of those questions. So it would be awesome if there are more questions. Any question at all is fine. And I went through that really fast, so we can go back and revisit anything as well if it is useful. So if we could stop sharing as well. I've lost my mouse again, sorry. So I can't click on stop share. And feel free to flick your video on if you're comfortable and you want to ask a question, because it's just nice to see faces.
Claire, while perhaps people are thinking of questions, there was another one that came through which was more related to your writing, I think, but it was how many drafts do you go through before publishing? Yeah, so drafts of reviews, I guess. Yeah.
Of reviews, yeah. I tend to write reviews in one, so I use Google Docs, and I tend to write down, actually, as I'm reading, I will quite often type in an idea, like, oh, this book reminded me of this, or I don't understand why this happened. Like I will start a Google Doc with all my notes, and then I will write probably, I would say, almost 5 drafts, I reckon, by the time it's ready. And then there'll be another round. So I'll go to the editor, and she will go through it, and I might, and then I'll take in those changes and possibly have another think about it based on the feedback. So I'd say 5 to 6.
So it's quite an investment of your time, isn't it?
Book reviewing takes ages. It takes me ages to write a long review. It would take me, I reckon, between reading and writing, maybe 15 to 20 hours almost. It's a long time because I really want to, because sometimes it also takes a while to figure out what you're really thinking as well. And
Yes.
the more you write, sometimes the more you understand what is going on. And if it's quite a complicated book too, and you want to try and get to the heart of it, yeah. But that's a long review. It wouldn't take me that long to write 200 words. I just have to get really clear about what I wanted to say.
Yeah. I had another question about, with you wearing your hat as a writer, do you read the reviews of your books? And before you said that some writers will say a book isn't complete until the reader has read it, have you been surprised by some of the what people have taken from your book that perhaps you hadn't thought about as you were writing it?
Yes, I have definitely. Well, first of all, I do read reviews, but I sometimes get my partner to read them first because I definitely get scared of the criticism. It's just, I think most every writer I know feels the same. It's kind of scary because it's your baby that you're putting out in the world. I have been surprised at how many readers have related the book to the world today. That surprised me because I didn't really think about that at all when I was writing. I was just very in the world, which is not our world, and it has a very historic foundation. But interestingly, I'm writing the second book now, and I'm thinking a lot about our world because of that. So that's been actually really helpful.
Very cool. It's sort of an iterative process.
Yeah.
So we have a question in the chat, which is, what order do you write the different parts of your review in? Do you start with the title, or does that come later?
That's a great question. I write the title usually at the end, once I can see what my review is doing and the most interesting part of it, and I'll try and pull out the title from that. Yeah, because often I don't really know until I've got to the end of the review, what the most interesting aspect is. I don't actually write in a structure that goes character setting plot. I don't do that. I actually I write from the ideas, and I look at what the main idea is, and then I go back to the beginning of the book and see how that is signposted and developed over the book. And then that helps you tell more of a story about the book, which is more, for me, more interesting to write. And then you can really closely engage with the ideas, which I think is really fun. But throughout that, you're looking at the language of the book and the character that's telling the story. So it's kind of all woven in. But that is after a very long time of writing essays and reviews. So I think that's where I'm at now. When I was first writing reviews, I definitely stuck to, let's look at the character, let's look at the setting. What are those things doing? And that's a really great way to start reviewing, because it's much easier to think about it like that. And it helps you look closely and do that close reading.
Yeah, so start with the structure, and then as you get more experienced over time, you might veer from that a little bit, but you've started with the foundational stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. And then we did have a question from Nell. Thanks, Nell. How did you get into book reviewing?
That's a great question because it's a very weird, there's no like job that you can apply for. But so I went to university and studied English. So that in a way was where I started. And high school too. Like I remember having to really think about books we were reading at high school and write about them. So I think all the stuff you're doing at school is training for book reviewing. At university, I remember doing specifically a course on close reading, and I think that really helped me read deeply. And then you have to write a lot of essays, and when you're studying English, and that is lots of practice. But then now, as a working grown up, book reviewing came to me. People asked me to review books. That's kind of how it happened because I was an active reader and someone who commented on books through my work as a festival person. I got commissioned to write book reviews, and my first book reviews are not very good, I have to say. Like it's quite you do have to practice a lot, and I wrote some art reviews that are terrible, that are online, that I wish I could delete. But because I was not very practiced at writing for a public audience. But I've definitely done lots more now, and because of my job at the Spinoff. So I run the book section of the Spinoff, which is a website that also covers politics and Wellington specifically, and also what else do we do? Pop culture, film and movies. So I run the books bit, and part of my job is asking other people to review books and reviewing them myself. So I have to keep practicing to get better and better at them.
Cool. And so in New Zealand, the different places that the people here might be interested to going to read reviews to get some ideas, just to read other people's reviews and, get the sense of it. So there'd be the Hooked on Books page on our website, but there's also the Sapling do some book reviews. What other places would you recommend people go to read some reviews?
So on the Spinoff, every quarter at the moment, we publish book reviews, children's book reviews by booksellers at Unity Books who read so many books and who are so good at reviewing, and they do really short reviews. So if you go to the Spinoff book section, we just published one on the weekend, and each bookshop, the one in Auckland, the one in Wellington, have published 5 short reviews of children's books, and they're really good and a great example of really short reviews that don't tell you too much, but just enough, and you'll definitely know whether you want the book after you've read them. So I definitely recommend those.
Cool. And we can put these links when we send out Claire's slideshow to you. We have another question. Do you think reviewing has helped your work as a writer?
Yes, it has, because I have had to think about the elements of writing. I've had to think about character and how they have to develop. I've had to think about how other writers formulate their plot. Plot I find quite hard, so I'm always interested in how other writers move their stories along. I've had to think about dialogue. I think dialogue's also really tricky, and the interesting thing I learned is less is more with dialogue. Short dialogue is really great. So thinking about the elements of writing and other people's work has definitely helped me think about mine. Yeah.
And Papakowhai School have asked the question, how easy was it to start writing your first book?
That's such a good question, and I have a layered answer, because in some ways it was really easy because the idea stuck in my brain and I could not sleep until I started it. And it became really exciting because I didn't really know what was going to happen when I wrote the book. I didn't do the thing where you plot it out first. I just had these characters, and I started to, the book grew as I wrote. So it was a really fun and kind of mysterious process, because the more you put into a book, the more it gives back to you. Things seem to happen on their own almost. But I had wanted to write a book for probably 30 years. but didn't for many reasons. One reason being I just did not think that I was a writer. I thought writers were kind of like another species to me. So now I say, if you want to write a book, just write your book, because all writers feel a bit weird and it's a bit scary starting to write a book, and it can be a bit like, whoa, this is really long and I don't really know what's happening. But every single writer thinks like that. And there's a great writer of children's novels called David Armand, really great writer. And sometimes when I get freaked out when I'm trying to write my book, I read his, he's got a great thing on his website that says when he wanted to be a writer, he'd go to the library and look at these amazing books and he'd think, I can't do that. But then he'd remind himself, all of those books started off as really messy drafts that didn't know what they were doing. And that helps me, because I'm like, that's okay. It's allowed to be really messy and it will get better the more I keep working on it. So on the one hand, it was really easy because I was excited by the idea of the book. On the other hand, it took me ages to just do it.
And Papakowhai, again, does reading other books influence your ideas for your own books?
Yes, it does. I think that you kind of, sometimes when I feel stink about not starting my book earlier, I remind myself that actually I spent 30 years reading. And I think if I hadn't have done that, I don't know if I would have been a writer at all, because all of the reading helped me understand stories and also what I liked, the kind of writing that I like. So I think reading in a way is probably the number one thing for being a writer. You just have to kind of fill your brain up, and all those stories go somewhere in your brain, and feed your imagination, and then you can have your own. They just help feed you, so that when you go to have your own ideas, there's lots of, what am I trying to say? I think you're not trying to copy anyone else's book, but stories get told again and again and again and again. Hero stories, underdog stories, orphan stories, and there's a reason for that. And I think having all of those stories in your head just helps you be a better writer, because you understand how it works.
And all those ideas just sit there until they're ready, right? So you're, after 30 years, that was the right time for you.
Yeah.
And do you get to test some of your ideas in your books on the audience that you're writing for?
No, I don't. And I think part of me is a bit scared to do that. And also part of me, I've talked about this with other writers, is the first person you're kind of writing for is yourself. So as long as you're happy with it, that's really all you can do. Once it's away from you, something you can't really, nothing you can do about it. So I think writing, as long as you're happy with the story you've written, that's all that matters. Yeah.
Cool. I think that is a really good place to end on, because the same goes for the reviews that you're writing as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So happily, you have written book one, but there's another one sort of coming, isn't there?
Yeah, I have to finish it by June, which is a little bit scary, but I am on track, and it will be coming out in 2026.
Amazing. Well, thank you everybody for your really, really good questions. And if you think of something afterwards, do feel free just to get in touch and we can pass that on to Claire. And we'll also send her slideshow out to you, just so that you can delve into that in a little bit more detail. But we've been really encouraged by how many keen readers there are who've participated, and really look forward to reading some of your reviews. And just really want to thank Claire so much for joining us today and sharing your knowledge and your experience with us.
Oh, pleasure. And it's so nice to see all of your amazing readers. And Papakowhai, I love seeing you in your library. So cool.
So thanks so much, everybody, and see you again. Ka kite.